There's a sound that sinks deeper than bone, a sound only the prairie wind hears. It's the sound of a mother's prayer when the world has given her nothing but dust and ice. On a morning so cold it felt like the sun had died, Dia Morgan whispered that prayer. She held her twin toddlers close, their small bodies trembling against hers. The last embers of their campfire were fading, winking out like dying stars. Her wagon was a skeleton nearby, a broken axle, a shattered dream. Her food was a memory. Her hands shook, not just from the biting wind, but from a fear so profound it had its own heartbeat. She was trying to get to her late husband's family, a name on a map somewhere out west. But the trail didn't care about widows. It didn't care about crying children. Wagons rolled past, their drivers looking straight ahead, pretending not to see. Then a figure emerged from the morning mist, a rider on a powerful black horse, Weston Hale, heir to a cattle empire so vast it was its own country. He stopped. He watched. He saw the desperation, but he saw something else too, a quiet fire in Dia's eyes that the cold couldn't touch. He dismounted. He walked toward the dying campfire, a man who had everything, approaching a woman who had nothing. He was about to say 3 words, just 3 simple words, but those words would ignite a firestorm that would consume them all. And you have to ask yourself, what drives a man of immense wealth to stop for a stranger on the road? What secret was he hiding that made this desperate woman and her 2 children the answer to a problem no one knew he had? Before we dive into the heart of this storm, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story grabs you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what's coming next is a twist you'll never see coming. The sun was a pale wafer in the sky, casting long, skeletal shadows as Weston Hale took in the scene. At 28, he had the hard-earned authority of a man who commanded land and men, but his whiskey-colored eyes held a private shadow, a restlessness that all the money in the world couldn't soothe. He was supposed to be checking fence lines, a routine task for the owner of the Hale cattle empire. But this was anything but routine. The woman. She couldn't be much older than him. Hardship had carved delicate lines around her emerald green eyes, telling tales of grief he couldn't imagine. Her hair, the color of autumn leaves, was pulled back in a severe braid, a stark contrast to the faded but once fine blue dress she wore. It was her stillness that got to him. She shivered, her body a fragile shield against the cold for the 2 small boys clinging to her skirt, yet she held her head with a defiant grace. "Mama," one of the boys whimpered, his voice a tiny thread in the vast, silent prairie. "I'm hungry." The woman, Dia, though he didn't know her name yet, smoothed the boy's dark hair. Her hand trembled. "I know, Tommy. Mama will find something soon." Weston's jaw clenched so tight it ached. He knew that tone. It was the sound of a lie born from love, a shield of words against a terrifying truth. The broken wagon told the rest of the story. An axle snapped clean in 2, an empty flour sack flapping in the wind, a few threadbare blankets that wouldn't warm a ghost. They were days from any town, stranded with winter breathing down their necks. This wasn't just trouble. This was a death sentence. He had ridden out from a ranch house that was more like a fortress, a monument to 3 generations of Hale ambition. His family brand was burned onto 10,000 cattle across 100,000 acres. His horse, Thunder, cost more than most men earned in a lifetime. All of it felt like a pile of useless, glittering rocks as he watched this woman try to comfort her children with empty promises. He swung off Thunder, his boots crunching on the frozen earth. The sound made her head snap up. Her eyes were a mixture of raw fear and a desperate, flickering hope. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Dia's hand flew to her boys, pulling them behind her skirt. She was a lioness with no claws, but a heart full of fire. "Good morning," she replied, her voice raspy but clear, hinting at an education and a life before this desolation. "I'm Dia Morgan. These are my sons, Tommy and Jamie." "Weston Hale," he said, tipping his hat. "Looks like you've hit a rough patch." "We're managing," she said, the lie hanging in the air between them like frozen breath. He could see the frantic thoughts racing behind her eyes. Is he a threat? A savior? What does he want? Men didn't just stop out here, not for nothing. He decided to cut through the pretense. There was no time for it. "Mrs. Morgan," he began, his voice taking on the command he usually reserved for his foreman. "Your wagon's finished. The nearest town is days away. You have no food, no shelter. Another night out here, it won't end well." Her chin shot up. That pride, it was magnificent. "We will manage, Mr. Hale." "I'm sure you believe that," he said, his voice softening again. He looked past her to the boys, their identical green eyes wide with a fear that tore at something deep inside him. "But your sons deserve more than just managing. They deserve to be warm. They deserve to be fed." As if on cue, the last ember of her fire gave a final, sad hiss and died. Silence fell, and in that silence, one of the twins began to cry. A quiet, hopeless sound that said he'd cried 1,000 times before and learned it did no good. That sound broke him. In one swift motion, Weston shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin-lined coat, a coat that screamed of wealth and comfort, and draped it over her trembling shoulders. "Mr. Hale, I can't—" "You can," he said, his voice a low growl of authority. He looked her straight in the eye, and the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. He saw her desperation, her pride, her fierce love for her children. He saw everything he needed. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, his voice dropping, intense and urgent. "I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a deal." She stared at him, confused. The warmth of the coat was a dizzying shock to her system. A deal? He took a breath. The next words would change everything. They were insane. They were desperate. But he was a man cornered by a ghost, and he saw his only way out standing right in front of him. "I need a wife," he said, the words stark and brutal in the cold morning air. "And I need a family, immediately." Dia's mind went blank. The wind, the cold, the hunger, it all vanished, replaced by a roaring in her ears. Had she heard him right? This powerful, wealthy stranger wasn't offering a ride to town. He was offering this. It was madness, a trap. You're insane," she whispered, pulling the heavy coat tighter as if it could shield her from the absurdity of his words. Her boys peeked out from behind her, their eyes fixed on the tall man who spoke in riddles. "I'm desperate," Weston corrected, his gaze unwavering. "And so are you, let's not pretend otherwise." He gestured to the broken wagon, the dead fire. "Your pride won't keep your sons from freezing tonight. My proposal will—" "Proposal?" she choked out, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. "You call this a proposal? You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. I know you're a mother who would walk through fire for her children. I know you haven't given up, even now. That's all I need to know." He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "Listen to me, Dia. This isn't about love or romance. This is a contract, a business arrangement." The logical, cold words cut through her panic. Business. That was a language she understood. Her father had been a banker. Her late husband, Samuel, a farmer. Their lives had been governed by ledgers and contracts. "What kind of business requires a man to marry a stranger he finds on the side of a trail?" she demanded, her voice gaining strength. Weston's handsome face hardened, the private shadow in his eyes deepening. "The kind of business that involves my entire inheritance. My grandfather was a man who believed in legacy. In his will, he stipulated that I must be married and have a family by my 30th birthday. Or I lose everything." He let that sink in. The Hale Empire, the 10,000 cattle, the sprawling ranch, all of it hanging by the thread of a marriage clause. "When is your birthday?" Dia asked, her mind racing, calculating. "In 3 weeks, he said flatly. 3 weeks. It was an impossible timeline. No proper courtship, no engagement. He needed a family, fully formed, and he needed one now. She and the twins, stranded and desperate, were a miracle walking into his lap, a ready-made solution. "And if you lose everything?" she pressed, needing to understand the full scope of his desperation. "It all goes to my uncle Elias Hale," Weston said, and the way he spoke the name with a quiet, venomous disgust told her more than any explanation could. A man who would burn this entire legacy to the ground just to spite my grandfather's memory. Suddenly, the situation snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. This wasn't a rich man's whim. This was a war. A war for a dynasty, and she and her boys had just become potential soldiers. So you want to… what? Parade us in front of your family? Pretend we're a happy, loving family you've been hiding away? The idea was ludicrous. A cheap playhouse drama. Exactly, he confirmed without a hint of shame. You will be Mrs. Hale. Your boys will be my sons. You will have a roof over your head, food in your bellies, safety, security, everything I can provide. In return, you help me save my home. She looked at Tommy and Jamie. Their faces were pale, their lips tinged with blue. Jamie coughed, a dry, rattling sound that tore at her heart. Another night out here was unthinkable, but a life built on such a monumental lie? It was a different kind of death. And what happens after? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. After your birthday passes and you've secured your inheritance? Weston hesitated for a fraction of a second. We maintain the arrangement for a respectable amount of time, a year, maybe 2, then we can part ways quietly. I'll see to it that you and your boys are provided for. A house, an allowance. You'll be free and safe. He was offering her a golden cage, a comfortable prison, but the alternative was a frozen grave. She clutched the faded photograph of Samuel inside her pocket. What would he say? Samuel, the honest farmer, who believed in truth above all else. But he also believed in survival. He would want her to protect their sons, his sons. There would have to be rules, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Conditions. A flicker of respect, of victory, lit his eyes. Name them. This is a business arrangement only, she stated, her voice shaking but firm. Our rooms will be separate. You will be a father to my boys in public and a guardian in private. You will treat them with kindness always, and you will never, ever lie to them. He nodded, accepting each term without argument. Agreed. And I will work, she added, a sudden fierce need for her own dignity rising up. I won't be a kept woman, a doll in your playhouse. I need to earn my keep. That surprised him. He studied her for a long moment, a new appreciation dawning on his face. My ranch bookkeeper recently retired. The position is open. The ledgers are a mess. If you have the skill, the job is yours. A bookkeeper. A real job. A purpose beyond the deception. It was a small thing, but it felt like a lifeline. She looked at her sons, then back at the powerful man who held their fate in his hands. He was offering a devil's bargain, a life of gilded lies, but he was also offering them life itself. Follow me home, he had said earlier. Now the words had a different meaning. It wasn't an invitation. It was the closing of a deal. With a silent prayer to a husband who couldn't answer, and her children's future hanging in the balance, Dia Morgan made her choice. All right, Mr. Hale, she said, her voice steady despite the world tilting on its axis. You have yourself a wife. The ride to the Hale Ranch was a blur of motion and unspoken tension. Dia rode Weston's pack horse. Jamie held tight in her arms while Tommy, mesmerized by the sheer size of thunder, rode in front of Weston, chattering away with the innocent trust of a child who doesn't understand the complex bargains of adults. Dia felt a pang of guilt. She was already breaking her own rule. This whole arrangement was a lie to her sons. Then they crested a final, rolling hill, and the ranch sprawled out below them. It wasn't a ranch, it was a kingdom. The main house was a 3-story giant built of golden sandstone, glowing in the afternoon sun. Wide porches supported by stately columns, wrapped around it like protective arms. But it was the details that made Dia's breath catch. White fences, perfectly maintained. Flower boxes bursting with color despite the encroaching cold. A sprawling, tended garden. This wasn't just wealth. This was pride. This was a home built to last for centuries. "Mama, look!" Tommy cried out, pointing to a pasture filled with magnificent horses. "How much land is this?" Dia asked, her voice hushed with awe. Her late husband had dreamed of 40 acres. This was a different universe. The main spread is about 100,000 acres, Weston replied, his voice casual, as if discussing the weather. My grandfather said a man needed room to breathe. As they drew closer, people emerged from the various outbuildings. Ranch hands stopped their work, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. A woman in a crisp white apron, the housekeeper, stepped onto the grand porch, her expression shifting to alarm as she took in the sight of her employer with a travel-worn woman and 2 small children. Mrs. Henderson, Weston called out as he dismounted, his voice ringing with authority. He lifted Tommy down as if he'd been doing it his whole life. Please prepare the blue suite. Mrs. Morgan and her sons will be staying with us. The housekeeper, a sturdy woman with kind eyes and graying hair, hurried down the steps. Of course, Mr. Weston. Welcome to the ranch, Mrs. Morgan. She gave a small curtsy, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. Dia's tattered dress, the exhaustion etched on her face, the way she clutched her son. Weston then dropped the first bomb. And Mrs. Henderson, he said, his voice carrying so everyone could hear, I'd like you to be the first to know. Mrs. Morgan has done me the honor of agreeing to become my wife. A collective gasp seemed to ripple through the air. Mrs. Henderson's jaw dropped. The ranch hands stared, mouths agape. Dia felt her cheeks burn with a heat that had nothing to do with the cold. The play had begun. Your wife, sir? The housekeeper stammered. We'll be married as soon as the circuit judge reaches Canyon Ridge, Weston announced, his arm resting possessively on Dia's shoulder. It was a calculated gesture of ownership, and it made her skin crawl. See to it that the news is sent to my uncle. I'm sure he'll want to offer his congratulations. The veiled threat in his tone was unmistakable. He was drawing his battle lines. As they walked towards the house, Dia felt dozens of eyes on her. From the bunkhouse, from the stables, from the windows of other, smaller houses dotted across the property. The news was spreading like wildfire. Weston Hale, the territory's most eligible and unreachable bachelor, was getting married. To a penniless widow with 2 children who'd appeared out of thin air. Just as they reached the steps, a man on horseback rounded the corner of the main house. He was older, dressed in a fine city suit that looked out of place on the dusty ranch. He had a narrow face and cold, calculating eyes that were a pale, washed-out version of Weston's. He took in the scene, Weston, Dia, the children, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. Well, well, nephew, the man said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. What have we here? Did you finally purchase yourself a family from a mail-order catalog? Weston's body went rigid. Uncle Elias, he said, his voice dangerously low. Show some respect. You're addressing my future wife. Elias Hale dismounted, his eyes raking over Dia with blatant contempt. He ignored Weston and spoke directly to her. Tell me, my dear, what was your price? I'm sure my nephew was generous. He has a habit of paying for what he wants. The insult was so direct, so brutal, it stole Dia's breath. She felt herself shrink, the shame of their arrangement washing over her. But then she felt Tommy's small hand slip into hers, and a fire ignited in her chest. This wasn't just about her, it was about them. She lifted her chin, meeting Elias's cold gaze without flinching. Some things, Mr. Hale, are not for sale, she said, her voice clear and steady. Love, for instance, and family. But I imagine those are concepts with which you are unfamiliar. The silence that followed was electric. Elias's smile vanished, replaced by a flash of pure fury. Even Weston looked at her with a new, startled respect. She hadn't just defended herself, she had fired the first shot in his war. Elias let out a short, humorless laugh. A sharp tongue! How quaint! He turned his venomous gaze back to Weston. You can't be serious about this, boy. You think this charade will work? You think you can fool me? I will see you ruined. I will tear this little fantasy apart piece by piece, and I will enjoy every moment of it. He spun on his heel, mounted his horse, and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and palpable hatred in his wake. The confrontation left Dia trembling, not from cold, but from rage and fear. This wasn't just a disapproving relative. This was an enemy. A dangerous, determined enemy who had just declared war on her and her children. Weston turned to her, his face grim. The pretense of the happy couple was gone, replaced by the grim reality of two soldiers in a trench. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Morgan," he said, his voice laced with a dark, bitter irony. "I hope you're ready for a fight." The inside of the Hale house was a world away from the dusty prairie. It was a cavern of polished wood, rich carpets, and silent, echoing halls. A grand staircase swept upwards into the shadows, and a tall grandfather clock ticked off the seconds of Dia's new, false life. It felt less like a home and more like a museum, a cold testament to a family's power. Mrs. Henderson, having recovered from her shock, showed them to the blue suite. It was larger than Dia's entire cabin back in Kansas. A sitting room with its own fireplace, a bedroom with a massive four-poster bed, and an adjoining nursery that had clearly been unused for years. "I'll have the staff bring up hot water for a bath, Mom," the housekeeper said, her tone now a careful mixture of professional duty and wary curiosity. "And Cook will prepare a meal for the boys." As maids bustled in with linens and firewood, Dia felt a growing sense of dislocation. Just this morning, she was praying for a crust of bread. Now she was being attended to by servants in a mansion, engaged to a man she barely knew, and enemy to another she'd just met. It was too much. After the staff had left, Weston appeared in the doorway of the nursery. The room had been hastily prepared, but a fire was already crackling in the hearth, casting a warm, dancing glow on the walls. "He will try to break you," Weston said, his voice low. He wasn't looking at her, but at the twins, who were staring wide-eyed at the rocking horse in the corner. "My uncle," he clarified. "He won't stop. He'll dig into your past. He'll look for any dirt, any secret he can use to prove this is a sham." Dia's blood ran cold. Her past, it was simple, sorrowful, but clean. A banker's daughter who married a farmer for love. A widow. What could he possibly find? Still, the thought of Elias's cold eyes scrutinizing every corner of her life was terrifying. "I have no secrets, Mr. Hale," she said, clutching the worn photograph of Samuel in her pocket. It was her only anchor to who she truly was. "Weston," he corrected her gently, "we're to be married, and I hope you have no secrets, Dia, for all our sakes, because Elias doesn't play by any rules." He crouched down, his expression softening as he spoke to the boys. "What do you think of your new room? Will it do?" Tommy, ever the brave one, nodded solemnly. "It's very big." Weston smiled, a genuine smile that briefly chased the shadows from his face. "Big enough for all your adventures." Later that evening, after the boys were bathed, fed, and tucked into the first soft, warm beds they'd known in months, Dia stood in the middle of her opulent sitting room and felt utterly, completely alone. She was wearing a dress provided by Mrs. Henderson, a simple dark wool, but it felt like a costume. A knock came at the door. It was Weston. He held a leather-bound book in his hand. "The ranch ledger," he said, holding it out to her. "You said you wanted to work. You can start tomorrow. The office is downstairs." She took the heavy book. Its weight was real, solid, a piece of this new life that she could understand. "Thank you. Don't thank me," he said, his eyes serious. "This is part of our deal, but there's something else." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The job is real. The threat from my uncle is real. But the rest, the public face of our engagement, we need to make it convincing." "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her guard immediately up. "Tomorrow we ride into Canyon Ridge," he announced. "Together. We'll visit the mercantile, the bank. We'll let people see us. The happy couple. We need to build our story before Elias can destroy it." It was a strategic move, a calculated offensive in their Cold War, but it felt like walking onto a stage with no script, the whole world watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. "And the boys?" "Mrs. Henderson will watch them. They'll be safe here, safer than anywhere else." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "Can you do this, Dia? Can you play the part of a woman in love with me? The question hung in the air, audacious and impossible. Could she look at this stranger, this man who had bought her and her children, and pretend to adore him? Could she smile and laugh and touch his arm as if he were the center of her world? She thought of Elias's cruel, triumphant face. She thought of her sons, sleeping peacefully, their bellies full, their bodies warm. She thought of the frozen prairie and the death that had been waiting for them there. There was no choice. There never had been. Yes, she said, her voice a ghost of its former self. I'm a better actress than you think. The town of Canyon Ridge was a hornet's nest of gossip. As Weston's carriage rolled down the main street, curtains twitched in every window. Shopkeepers paused, sweeping their stoops. Men talking on the boardwalk fell silent, their eyes following the magnificent carriage and its shocking occupants. Dia felt like an animal in a zoo, every move scrutinized. Weston sat beside her, a pillar of calm confidence. He pointed out landmarks, the bank, the hotel his uncle favored, the church where the circuit judge would preside over their wedding. He was playing the part of the proud fiancé flawlessly. Dia, however, felt a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Smile, he murmured, his voice too low for the driver to hear. They're watching. They need to believe it. She forced her lips into a shape that might pass for a smile. It felt brittle, like it might crack at any moment. Their first stop was the Mercantile. The moment they stepped inside, the cheerful chatter ceased. The proprietor, a portly man named Mr. Abernathy, rushed forward, wiping his hands on his apron. Mr. Hale, what a surprise! His eyes darted to Dia, hungry with curiosity. Abernathy, Weston said, his voice booming with false cheer. I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Mrs. Dia Morgan. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture of casual intimacy that sent a jolt through her. She and her boys will be needing a few things. A whole new wardrobe, I expect. Put it all on the Hale account. The proprietor's eyes widened. A whole new wardrobe. The Hale account. This was serious. Of course, Mr. Hale. An honor, Mrs. Morgan. An absolute honor. As Dia numbly selected fabrics and looked at ready-made dresses, she could feel the whispers rippling through the store. A widow, 2 children. Where did he find her? She looks like a strong gust of wind would blow her over. Each whisper was a tiny needle, pricking at the fragile armor of her composure. Weston never left her side. He offered opinions on colors, held up bolts of cloth, and acted for all the world like a man besotted with his future bride. He was good, terrifyingly good. At one point, he picked up a length of deep green silk that matched her eyes. This one, he said, his voice soft but audible to the listening ears around them. It will bring out the fire in you. Dia's cheeks flushed a genuine furious red. How dare he? How dare he make this so public, so shamelessly false? But she saw the calculating look in his eyes. He was building their legend, brick by painful brick. Their next stop was the bank. As they entered, a man stepped out of the bank manager's office, nearly colliding with them. It was Elias Hale. His face, already sour, curdled into a mask of pure disgust when he saw them. Well, nephew, Elias sneered, his eyes flicking over Dia's worn dress. Taking your new acquisition out for a stroll. Be careful she doesn't scare the horses. Elias, Weston said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. If you speak to my fiancée that way again, you and I will have a conversation you will regret for the rest of your life. The threat was naked, brutal. The bank fell silent. Elias's eyes narrowed into slits. Is that so? You forget your place, boy. This town, this family? I have more influence than you can imagine, and I will use it, mark my words. He gave Dia one last, lingering glare, a look that promised retribution, before striding out of the bank. The encounter left Dia shaken. The banker, a nervous man named Thompson, quickly ushered them into his office. A pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Morgan, Thompson said, wringing his hands. Weston has instructed me to grant you full access to his personal accounts. He pushed a signature card across the desk. If you'll just sign here. Dia stared at the card. Dia Hale. It wasn't her name. It was a lie. A legal document that would cement her false identity. Weston put his hand over hers, his fingers warm and strong. It's all right, he whispered, his lips close to her ear, a pantomime of affection for the banker. But the message was for her. Sign it. We have to. Her hand trembling, she signed the name. Dia Hale. Each letter felt like a betrayal of Samuel, of herself. When she was done, Weston squeezed her hand. Thank you, he breathed. It wasn't part of the act. It was real. A moment of genuine gratitude between two co-conspirators. On the ride back to the ranch, the silence in the carriage was thick and heavy. The performance was over, and the reality of what they had done settled in. Dia had a new name, a new wardrobe on order, and access to a fortune she couldn't comprehend. She had also made a powerful enemy and told 1,000 lies with her smile. You were good today, Weston said, breaking the silence. He was no longer looking at her, but out at the rolling plains. Better than I expected. I was not good, she retorted, her voice sharp with self-loathing. I was a fraud. Everything about that was a lie. It was a necessity, he countered, turning to face her. The playful fiancé was gone, replaced by the grim commander. Elias will not stop. That display at the bank was just the beginning. He will try to poison the town against you. He will try to find a crack in our story. We have to be flawless. That night, sleep offered no escape. Dia dreamed of Elias's cold eyes, of signing a name that wasn't hers over and over again. She woke in the dark, her heart pounding. She crept into the nursery, needing to see her sons. They were sleeping peacefully, two small, perfect forms in the moonlight. This was why she was doing it. For them. She stood by the window, looking out over the dark, sleeping ranch. A light was on in the office on the ground floor. Weston was still awake. On impulse, she went downstairs. She found him hunched over the very ledger he had given her, a glass of whiskey at his elbow, his face etched with worry. He looked up as she entered, surprised to see her. Couldn't sleep? He asked. I hate this, she confessed, the words tumbling out. I hate the lies, the pretense. I feel like I'm losing myself. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. I know, but we're so close, Dia. Just a few more weeks. Once the inheritance is secure, the pressure will ease. We can be more honest. Can we? She challenged. How do you walk back from a lie this big? He didn't have an answer. Instead, he pushed the ledger toward her. You said you wanted to work. Maybe this will help. Give you something real to focus on. She sat down opposite him, pulling the heavy book closer. The smell of leather and ink was grounding. She opened it to the first page. Columns of numbers, spidery handwriting, a record of a massive, complex operation. Morrison, the old bookkeeper. His eyesight was failing, Weston explained. Things got messy toward the end. I'm probably owed money from a dozen different cattle buyers, and overpaying others. Dia ran her finger down a column. Her father had taught her numbers. Samuel had taught her the hard-won value of every cent. She started to scan the entries, her mind shifting from the swirling chaos of her emotions to the clean, cold logic of mathematics. For hours they sat in silence, the only sounds the ticking of the clock and the scratching of her pen. As the sun began to rise, she found it. A small thing, an entry for feed grain. The price was wrong. Not by much, but it was wrong. She cross-referenced it with an older entry. The price from the same supplier was 15% lower. That's odd, she murmured. What is? Weston asked, his voice thick with exhaustion. This supplier, Johnson's Feed. You've been paying 15% more for the last 6 months than you were before. Weston frowned. Johnson's a good man. Been supplying this ranch for 20 years. There must be a reason. A drought, a bad harvest. Perhaps, Dia said, but a strange feeling, a prickle of unease, settled over her. She turned the page, and then another. And she found another discrepancy, and another. Small amounts, easily overlooked. A delivery of fencing wire that was recorded but never paid for. a sale of 10 steers where the payment was $200 short. They weren't just mistakes, they were a pattern. "Weston," she said, her voice low and urgent. "This isn't just messy bookkeeping, this is something else." She looked up at him, her green eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying realization. "Someone is stealing from you." The accusation hung in the silent office, heavy and dangerous. Weston stared at her, then at the ledger, his face a mask of disbelief. "That's impossible," he said flatly. "My men are loyal. Most of them have been with this ranch longer than I have." "Numbers don't lie," Dia insisted, her finger tracing the suspicious entries. "Look, it's systematic. Small amounts spread out over months, always from different accounts. It's designed not to be noticed. Morrison may have been losing his sight, but this is deliberate. This is theft." Weston stood up and paced the room, the grim commander back in full force. He trusted his people. His father and grandfather had built the Hale Empire on loyalty, and he had maintained it. The idea that one of his own was a thief felt like a betrayal of his entire legacy. "It must be Morrison," he said finally, seizing the easiest explanation. "He got old. Maybe he felt he was owed more. I'll send a man to talk to him." "Maybe," Dia said, though she wasn't convinced. It felt too simple. But what if it isn't? What if the person responsible is still here, on this ranch, watching us right now? The thought sent a chill through the room that had nothing to do with the morning air. Everyone who had watched her arrive, who had whispered about her in town, any one of them could be the thief. Any one of them could be an enemy hiding in plain sight. "Get some rest," Weston said, his voice strained. "You've done enough for one night. Let me handle this." But Dia couldn't rest. The ledger was a puzzle, and she was determined to solve it. Over the next few days, she threw herself into the books, working late into the night in the quiet office. The work was a refuge from the constant performance of being Weston's loving fiancé, a performance that was growing more exhausting by the day. She had to endure dinners where Weston would casually touch her hand, sending confusing sparks up her arm. She had to smile through conversations with the staff, knowing they were all reporting back to Mrs. Henderson, who was watching her with an increasingly speculative eye. The housekeeper was kind to the boys, but her gaze on Dia was sharp, questioning. She didn't believe the story, not for a second. The worst part was the twins. They adored Weston. He was teaching them about the horses, carving them small wooden animals, treating them with a gentle authority that their own father would have admired. They were beginning to see him as a permanent fixture in their lives, a father figure. And every time Tommy called him Mr. Weston, with a trusting smile, Dia felt a fresh wave of guilt. The lie was taking root in their innocent hearts. One afternoon, while Dia was deep in the ledgers, Elias Hale paid another visit. He didn't come to the front door. He came straight to the office, walking in without knocking. "The little bookkeeper," he sneered, his eyes falling on the open ledger. "Trying to make yourself useful? Or are you just figuring out how much my nephew is worth?" Dia's hand instinctively went to the page she was working on, covering the numbers. "I'm doing my job, Mr. Hale. Something I suggest you try." His cold smile widened. "Oh, I am doing a job. I've been doing some research. On you." He leaned against the desk, his presence menacing. "Dia Morgan, widow of Samuel Morgan, a dirt-poor farmer from Kansas, daughter of a disgraced banker from St. Louis who lost everything. You come from a long line of failures, don't you?" The cruelty of his words was like a physical blow. He had been digging. He knew about her father's bankruptcy, the shame that had haunted their family for years. "My family's history is none of your concern," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Oh, but it is," he hissed, leaning closer. "Because it shows a pattern of desperation, a woman with nothing, who suddenly finds herself engaged to one of the richest men in the territory. It's a very convenient story. A little too convenient." He paused, letting his threat hang in the air. "I'm going to find the truth, little bird. I'm going to find the crack in your story, and I'm going to shatter it. And when I do, my nephew will be humiliated, and the Hale legacy will be mine. as it should have been all along. He left as abruptly as he arrived, leaving Dia's heart pounding in her chest. The threat was no longer veiled. He was actively hunting her. That night, she couldn't focus on the numbers. Elias's words echoed in her mind. The crack in your story. He was right. The story was a lie, and lies were fragile. She felt a desperate need for something real, something true. She went to her room and took out the small, worn box where she kept Samuel's things, his letters, the deed to their lost farm, and the faded photograph she always carried. She stared at his kind, familiar face. "What do I do, Samuel?" she whispered. "I'm so lost." As she looked at the photograph, her eyes caught on something she'd never paid much attention to before. In the background, behind Samuel, was a partial view of their old wagon, the wagon she'd been using on her journey. And she noticed the axle. It was the same one that had broken. Looking closely, she could see a dark line near the wheel hub, a faint shadow in the old photograph. A memory surfaced. Samuel, working on the wagon a few months before he died. "There's a hairline fracture in this axle, Dia," he'd said. "It's a weakness. One good jolt on a rough road and it'll snap clean." They never had the money to fix it. She had forgotten. But wait. The trail where she had broken down, it hadn't been that rough. She remembered the moment clearly. A sudden jarring crack, a lurch to the side. She had assumed she'd hit a large, unseen rock in the dark. But what if it wasn't a rock? What if the axle hadn't just broken? What if it had been broken for her? The thought was so monstrous, so chilling, that she felt the air leave her lungs. Someone could have known about the weakness in the axle. Someone could have followed her, waited for the right moment on a desolate stretch of road, and delivered a single, calculated blow with a sledgehammer. A blow that would look like an accident. A blow that would leave a widow and 2 small children stranded, to freeze to death on the prairie. It would be the perfect murder. No witnesses, no proof. Just another tragedy on the unforgiving trail. Who would do such a thing? Who hated Weston enough to murder a woman and children just to prevent him from meeting his grandfather's marriage clause? The answer was immediate and terrifying. Elias. The realization hit Dia with the force of a physical blow. She stumbled back, collapsing onto the bed, her mind reeling. This wasn't just a war for an inheritance anymore. Elias wasn't just trying to ruin them with words. He had tried to kill them. He had left her and her sons to die in the cold. Weston's rescue hadn't been a coincidence he'd stumbled upon. It had been an intervention. He had saved them from a murder plot he didn't even know existed. The ledger, the stolen money, it suddenly seemed so small, so insignificant compared to this. She had to tell Weston. He had to know what kind of monster his uncle truly was. She grabbed the photograph, her proof, her memory, and ran from the room, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She found Weston on the porch, staring out into the night, a troubled look on his face. "Weston!" she cried, her voice breathless. "It's Elias! It's so much worse than we thought!" She explained everything, her words tumbling out in a rush, the weak axle, Samuel's warning, the convenient accident on the empty trail. She showed him the faint line on the photograph. "He didn't just want to discredit me," she finished, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "He tried to eliminate me. He tried to murder us." Weston listened, his face growing darker with every word. He took the photograph, studying it under the lantern light. When he looked up, the whiskey-colored eyes she was becoming so familiar with were blazing with a cold, terrifying rage she had never seen before. "I knew he was ruthless," Weston said, his voice a low, deadly growl. "But this, to harm children." He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "This ends. Tonight." "What are you going to do?" Dia asked, her own fear momentarily eclipsed by the raw power radiating from him. "I'm going to pay my dear uncle a visit," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. "And we are going to have that conversation I promised him." He strode towards the stables, moving with the lethal grace of a predator. Dia watched him go, a new and complex emotion stirring within her. This man, this stranger bound to her by a contract, was about to ride into danger for her sons. The line between the business arrangement and something far more real was beginning to blur, whether she wanted it to or not. But as he disappeared into the darkness, a new, chilling thought took root in her mind. Elias was clever. He wouldn't have done this himself. He would have hired someone who knew the trails, someone who wouldn't be noticed, someone from the ranch. The thief she'd been hunting in the ledgers and the would-be murderer on the prairie. What if they were the same person? What if Elias had an accomplice living right here under their noses, watching their every move? The safety of the Hale Ranch suddenly felt like a fragile illusion. The walls weren't a fortress. They were a trap, and she and her sons were locked inside with an enemy they couldn't see. Dia's mind raced, connecting invisible dots. The theft from the ranch was systematic, clever. It required intimate knowledge of the operations. The sabotage of her wagon required knowledge of her route and her equipment. Both pointed to an inside man. She couldn't wait for Weston to return. He was walking into a confrontation, but she held the key to the real conspiracy. She had to go back to the ledger. The answer had to be there, hidden in the columns of numbers. She ran back to the office, the grandfather clock in the hall seeming to tick louder, marking the seconds of her dwindling time. She lit a lamp, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries. She spread the ledgers across the massive oak desk, her eyes scanning the pages with frantic intensity. She wasn't just looking for discrepancies anymore. She was looking for a ghost, a name that appeared too often, a pattern that pointed to one person. The hours bled together. The moon climbed higher in the sky. She traced payments for supplies that were never delivered, cattle sales that came up short, wages paid to phantom ranch hands. It was a web of deceit, so intricate and spanning back so far, it was breathtaking. It went back years, long before Morrison's eyesight had started to fail. This wasn't just theft. This was a long, patient plundering of the Hale Empire. And then she found it. A single name, connected to a dozen different suspicious transactions. A foreman who had been fired 2 years ago for drunkenness. A supplier who had gone out of business. A buyer from a distant territory. All the transactions were signed off on by one person. The bookkeeper, Morrison. It had been him all along. Not just because his eyesight was failing, but because he was the architect of the entire scheme. Weston's dismissal of him had been a lucky break that had temporarily disrupted the flow of money, but the system had been in place for years. But why? Simple greed didn't seem like enough of a motive for such a long and patient betrayal. It felt personal, vengeful. She remembered what Elias had said. "I've been doing some research, on you, on your husband." He hadn't just been trying to intimidate her, he had been looking for a connection. Samuel Morgan. Her heart stopped. She pulled out the small box of Samuel's belongings again. There had to be something she missed. She sifted through his letters, mostly mundane notes about crops and weather. But at the bottom of the box, tucked into an old almanac, was a small, leather-bound journal. She had never read it. It felt too private, a part of him she wasn't ready to face. Now, she opened it. His handwriting was neat, precise. The first few pages were about the farm, about his love for her, his hopes for their sons. But then the tone changed. He wrote about a trip he'd taken before they were married, a trip back to the town where he was born, Canyon Ridge. Dia's breath caught. Samuel had never told her he was from this area. He wrote about his father, a man who had worked for the most powerful family in the territory, a man who had been a bookkeeper, a man named Morrison. Morrison was Samuel's father. The world tilted on its axis. The old disgraced bookkeeper wasn't just a thief, he was her father-in-law, her son's grandfather. She read on, her hands trembling. Samuel wrote that his father had told him a story of betrayal. Decades ago, Morrison claimed he had been partners with Weston's grandfather, a young Weston Hale Sr. They had started the ranch together, with Morrison's knowledge and Hale's capital. But when the ranch became successful, Hale had cheated him, forging documents to push him out and take everything. reducing him to a paid employee. Morrison had spent the next 40 years nursing a bitter grudge, working as the Hale family's loyal bookkeeper, while secretly, patiently, stealing back the fortune he believed was rightfully his. He was taking his revenge, $1 at a time. Samuel, his son, had been horrified. He didn't believe in theft. He believed in justice. The journal detailed his plan. He was going to find the original partnership agreement, the proof of his father's claim, and restore his family's name legally. He believed the document was hidden somewhere on the Hale ranch. That's why he had wanted to move west. That's why he had sent Dia on this trail. He wasn't sending her to his brother. There was no brother. He was sending her to Canyon Ridge, to the Hale ranch itself. He was sending her into the lion's den to find the proof he never could. His death had turned his quest into her unwitting inheritance. The broken axle wasn't Elias's doing alone. Morrison knew about the weakness. He must have told Elias. They were working together. Elias wanted the ranch, and Morrison wanted his revenge. They had used Dia as a pawn, planning to get rid of her and the boys, leaving Weston vulnerable and without an heir. But the conspiracy was even darker. As she turned the final page of the journal, a loose slip of paper fell out. It was a letter addressed to Samuel from his father, Morrison. It was dated just after the twins were born. "Samuel," it read, "you must be careful. If what you suspect is true, if your wife's story about that night in St. Louis is what we think it is, then those boys are more than just your sons. They carry the blood of our enemy. Their resemblance to you is a blessing. It hides the truth. But if Hale ever finds out, he will not see them as your children. He will see them as his own, and he will take them from you." Dia's blood turned to ice, that night in St. Louis. Before she met Samuel, she had been young, naive, attending a grand ball with her banker father. She had met a man, a handsome, reckless stranger with whiskey-colored eyes. They had talked, they had danced, he had swept her off her feet. There was too much champagne, a stolen moment of passion in a shadowed garden. She never even learned his name. She had been so ashamed, so terrified of the consequences. She had pushed the memory down, buried it deep. When she discovered she was pregnant, the kind and gentle Samuel Morgan had stepped in, offering her his name, his protection, his love. He had sworn to raise the children as his own, and he had loved them with every fiber of his being. She had believed he was their father. But now, Morrison's letter, Samuel's journal, it all crashed down upon her with the force of a tidal wave. The stranger in the garden, the reckless young man with whiskey-colored eyes, the heir to a fortune passing through town, Weston, the boys, Tommy and Jamie, her sons, Samuel's sons. They were not Samuel's sons. They were Weston Hale's. The world dissolved into a meaningless roar. The contract, the sham marriage, the fight for the inheritance. It was all a lie built on top of a bigger, more profound truth. She hadn't stumbled into a stranger's war. She had brought the rightful heirs home to their own kingdom. The boys weren't just a convenient solution to Weston's problem. They were his blood, his sons, his legacy, and he had no idea. The ledger, the journal, the letter, they lay on the desk in front of her, a constellation of secrets that could save or destroy them all. Weston was confronting Elias, believing the fight was about a will and a piece of land. But the real war was here, in this room, and the ultimate prize wasn't a ranch. It was two little boys, sleeping peacefully upstairs, oblivious to the storm about to break over their heads. A sudden thunderous crash from the front hall shattered the silence. Shouts erupted, the sound of splintering wood. The confrontation hadn't waited for Weston to find Elias. Elias had come to them. The final battle had begun. Dia grabbed the journal and the letter, her mind clear and sharp with a terrifying purpose. She was no longer a pawn. She was a queen, and she was about to defend her children's birthright. She ran out of the office and into a scene of pure chaos. Elias Hale stood in the center of the grand entrance hall, his face contorted in a triumphant sneer. Behind him stood the town sheriff and two deputies. They had a battering ram, the front door hanging off its hinges. In front of them, blocking the staircase, stood Weston, his face a thunderous mask of rage. Several ranch hands stood behind him, armed with pistols. "It's over, nephew!" Elias shouted, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Your little charade is finished. I have a sworn statement from your former bookkeeper, Morrison. He's confessed to everything." Weston's eyes narrowed. "Confessed to what, Elias? To stealing from my family for 40 years? Elias laughed, a high, manic sound. "He confessed to being blackmailed. By you. He claims you discovered his indiscretions and forced him to help you cook the books, hiding your own disastrous investments. You're bankrupt, Weston. You've been draining the ranch dry and you hired this actress." He spat the word at Dia as she appeared at the bottom of the stairs. "To secure an inheritance that you've already squandered." It was a brilliant lie, a complete reversal of the truth. Elias was painting Weston as the villain, using Morrison's real crimes as the foundation for his fiction. The sheriff, a man clearly in Elias's pocket, stepped forward. "Weston Hale, I have a warrant here to inspect your financial records, on suspicion of fraud." "You will do no such thing," Weston snarled, not moving an inch. "Don't be a fool, boy," Elias gloated. "It's my word, the word of the town's most respected citizen against yours, and I have a witness. Where is the woman? I have more news for you about your precious fiancée." He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Dia. "Ah, there she is, the grieving widow. Sheriff, you'll find this interesting. My sources tell me her late husband's death wasn't from illness. It was an accident, a suspicious one. And guess who stood to gain from him being out of the picture? A desperate woman who quickly found her way into a rich man's bed. He was trying to frame her for Samuel's death. He was twisting everything, turning their secrets into weapons against them. Dia felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was gone, replaced by an icy resolve. She walked forward, stepping past the armed ranch hands to stand beside Weston. She held the journal and the letter in her hand. "You are a liar, Elias," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the chaos. "But you are right about one thing. There are many secrets in this house. It's time they were brought into the light." She turned not to Elias but to the sheriff. "Sheriff, you want to see evidence of fraud? Here it is." She opened Samuel's journal and thrust it into his hands. This is the journal of Samuel Morgan, and it tells a very different story. It tells the story of his father, Morrison, and a 40-year grudge. It tells the story of how Morrison systematically stole from the Hale family, and how he planned to use that theft to see his own grandson inherit this ranch. Elias's face went pale. "What is this nonsense? The woman is hysterical." "It also tells the story of a weak wagon axle," Dia continued, her voice rising, her eyes locked on Elias. "An axle that Morrison knew about. An axle that someone struck with a sledgehammer on a lonely stretch of road, hoping to murder a woman and her 2 small children in the cold." The sheriff looked from the journal to Elias, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Elias, is this true?" "She's lying! It's a trick!" Elias shrieked, his composure shattering. "Am I?" Dia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She held up the final letter. "This is a letter from Morrison to his son, Samuel. It contains the biggest secret of all, a secret he thought would put his own blood in charge of this ranch, a secret he was willing to kill for." She looked at Weston, her heart aching for the blow she was about to deliver. "Weston, the contract we made, the business arrangement, it was all based on a lie, but not the lie we thought." She took a deep breath. "My sons, Tommy and Jamie, Samuel Morgan was not their father. He was a good man who gave them his name, but he was not their father." She turned her gaze back to the sheriff, to Elias, to the entire room. "Their father is a man I met once, years ago in St. Louis. A man whose name I never knew, until I came here." She looked directly into Weston's stunned, disbelieving eyes. "Their father," she said, her voice breaking with the weight of it all, "is Weston Hale." A profound, shattering silence fell over the hall. The world stopped. Weston stared at her, his face a canvas of shock, confusion, and dawning, impossible understanding. The twins, his sons. The pieces clicked into place, their green eyes so like her own, but something else, a shape of the face, a stubborn set of the jaw. It was like looking at a reflection of his own childhood. Elias was the first to break the silence. He let out a strangled, desperate laugh. "She's mad! It's a pathetic last-ditch lie! Prove it!" "I don't have to," a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. Standing there was Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, and beside her stood a frail, shaking old man. Morrison. The old bookkeeper looked broken, defeated. His eyes met Dia's, and she saw not malice, but a lifetime of bitterness that had finally crumbled into dust. "She's telling the truth," Morrison said, his voice a dry rattle. "I've known for years. Samuel told me. The boy has his father's eyes." He turned his gaze on Elias, and it was filled with a weak, watery venom. "And he is the one who made me do it. He found out I was stealing. He blackmailed me. He promised me a share of the ranch if I helped him frame Weston. He told me to sabotage the wagon. He said it would just scare her, make her turn back. I never thought he would leave them to die." The confession, raw and undeniable, sealed Elias's fate. The sheriff, no longer in any doubt, turned to his deputies. "Elias Hale, you are under arrest for blackmail, conspiracy, and attempted murder." As the deputies dragged the screaming, protesting Elias away, the great hall was left in a stunned quiet. The ranch hands lowered their guns. The threat was gone. The war was over. Weston hadn't moved. He was still staring at Dia, at the sons he never knew he had. He took a hesitant step toward her, then another. He looked from her face to the top of the stairs, where two small, sleepy figures had appeared, woken by the commotion. Tommy and Yami, his boys. He looked back at Dia, and all the pretense, all the contracts and conditions vanished. In his eyes, she saw not the ranch owner, not the commander, but the man. A man who had been lonely his whole life, who had yearned for a family, and who had just been given the one thing his money could never buy. "Is it true?" he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "Dia, is it all true?" She could only nod, tears finally streaming down her face. Tears of grief, of relief, of a fear so deep it was only now releasing its hold. He closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as a solution to a problem, not as a partner in a conspiracy, but as the mother of his children, the woman fate had brought back to him. "I have more than I need," he had told her once, "and you have less than you deserve." How hollow those words seemed now. He was the one who had been given everything. Up on the staircase, Tommy's small voice cut through the quiet. "Mama, is everything okay?" Weston didn't take his eyes off Dia. "Yes, son," he said, his voice thick with an emotion so powerful it was almost a prayer. "Everything is perfect." He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't part of the act. It wasn't for an audience. It was a promise, a beginning, the first real and true thing in a world that had been built on lies, the broken wagon, the desperate deal, the threat of a bitter enemy. It had all been a long, winding, and dangerous road leading them right here, home. If you were on the edge of your seat through this storm of secrets and lies, imagine the stories we have waiting for you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next story.